Madrid, 1834. The palace is hushed, draped in the heavy silence of mourning. King Ferdinand VII is dead. Yet, within the royal chambers, the story of his life refuses to be buried. For even in death, Ferdinand would not rest quietly. His reign had been a tapestry woven of paranoia, cruelty, humiliation, and whispers so disturbing that they were scrubbed from official history, surviving only in rumors and private letters. And now, as the royal physicians gather around his lifeless body, their task is not only to preserve a monarch, but to conceal the grotesque truth that had haunted him his entire life. To understand how Ferdinand became the king, remembered as one of Spain's most infamous rulers, you must look first to his birth, for he came into this world already cursed. Ferdinand was born on October the 14th, 1784, at the Escorial Palace near Madrid, the son of King Charles IV and Queen Maria Luisa of Parma. On the surface, his birth should have been a cause for national celebration, but the truth lay deeper, in the blood that flowed through his veins. For Ferdinand was not merely a child of royalty, he was the product of centuries of inbreeding within the Spanish Habsburg and Bourbon dynasties. Cousin had married cousin, uncle had taken niece. Generation after generation, the line that produced Ferdinand had grown rotten from within, poisoned by its own obsession with keeping power contained inside the family. The results of this genetic gamble were devastating. Spain had already seen kings born feeble-minded, twisted in body, or sickly beyond hope. Ferdinand inherited not just the throne, but this legacy of corruption. He emerged into the world marked by nature's cruelty, his body carrying the imprint of centuries of mistakes. And while no official chronicler dared write it plainly, those closest to the young prince whispered of a peculiarity, an abnormality that would shadow him all his life. From his earliest years, Ferdinand's life was shaped by ridicule. He lived in a palace buzzing with gossip. Servants giggled behind closed doors, courtiers exchanged knowing glances, and foreign diplomats recorded strange reports in secret letters. Ferdinand quickly grew aware of the whispers, though he could not always prove their words, and so he began to see mockery everywhere, in the way his tutors addressed him, in the smiles of courtiers, even in the bows of visiting dignitaries. What might have been dismissed as childhood insecurity soon hardened into deep suspicion and bitterness. His family life only made matters worse. His father, Charles IV, was famously weak-willed, more interested in hunting than ruling. His mother, Queen Maria Luisa, humiliated the royal household by openly parading her affair with Manuel de Godoy, Spain's powerful prime minister. For young Ferdinand, there was no safe harbor, no guiding hand to nurture or discipline him. Instead, he grew up in a court where betrayal was routine, dignity was shattered daily, and shame was the currency of survival. Combine this environment with the prince's physical abnormality, and you have the making of a deeply fractured soul. Ferdinand's earliest tutors noticed a troubling streak of cruelty in him. He was vindictive towards servants, dismissing or punishing them for minor mistakes. One story tells of a page who stumbled into his chamber at the wrong moment. Instead of showing mercy, Ferdinand had the boy flogged and his family banished from Madrid. This was no random cruelty. It was Ferdinand's way of controlling the humiliation he feared more than anything: exposure. As Ferdinand grew older, The court's whispers became more dangerous. Reports from foreign envoys described the prince's peculiar constitution. Physicians brought in to examine him left behind private notes, hidden for centuries in archives, describing the unusual challenges he faced. Their language was clinical, but the meaning was clear. Ferdinand's condition set him apart, and not in a way that inspired admiration. In an age when kings were expected to embody strength, fertility, and refinement, Ferdinand was marked as a grotesque anomaly. This secret, combined with the constant humiliation of his parents' scandalous behavior, festered inside him like a wound. By adolescence, Ferdinand had become a master of paranoia. He trusted no one, saw enemies in every corner, and began to cultivate a persona that was equal parts sullen and menacing. The young prince grew resentful not only of individuals, but of society itself. He saw laughter as an attack, courtesy as mockery, and respect as deceit. And yet, despite his bitterness, Ferdinand's future was already being prepared. In the early 1800s, his supporters within Spain began promoting him as El Deseado, the desired one. This was propaganda at its most cynical. To the people, Ferdinand was painted as a reformer, a potential savior who could rescue Spain from the corruption of his father's reign and the despised influence of Godoy. But behind the scenes, those same nobles who championed him knew the truth. They knew Ferdinand was volatile, paranoid, and unstable. They allied with him not out of faith in his character, but because they hoped to control him once he sat on the throne. His marriage to Princess Maria Antonia of Naples in 1802 was meant to solidify this hopeful image. She was young, intelligent, and by all accounts, genuinely optimistic about her new role. For her, the wedding was supposed to be the beginning of a fairy tale. But from the very first night, that dream collapsed into a nightmare. Accounts from those closest to the queen tell of screams, hysteria, and despair. The marriage bed became not a place of intimacy, but of fear and humiliation. What followed over the next few years was a spiral of trauma. Ferdinand's insecurities deepened. Maria Antonia, terrified and broken, turned increasingly to laudanum to endure her role as queen. Their efforts to produce an heir failed again and again, each loss adding fuel to Ferdinand's paranoia. He began to suspect his wife of sabotage, accusing her of disloyalty and betrayal. For Maria Antonia, life became unbearable. By 1807, at only 21 years old, she was dead. The official record listed illness as the cause, but the court whispered darker possibilities. Some claimed she had been poisoned. Others suspected that Ferdinand himself had simply driven her into despair. And yet, even her death did not silence the rumors. Within days, the palace apothecary was found dead, his final letter confiscated and never seen again. Whispers spread that the letter contained confessions, proof of poisons, or revelations about Ferdinand's condition too dangerous to be made public. Ferdinand appeared to grieve, but in truth he seemed strangely relieved. Within weeks, he began searching for another wife, convinced that Spain's future still rested on his ability to produce an heir. But the physicians knew better. Behind closed doors, they scrambled to devise new methods, new treatments, and even strange contraptions to assist their monarch. Spain's dynasty now hung upon what was, in essence, a desperate medical experiment. But Ferdinand's personal torment was not just his own burden, it was spilling into the governance of Spain itself. His suspicion of others deepened into full-blown paranoia. Ministers were distrusted. Servants were dismissed, often disappearing entirely. Soldiers and officials, suspected of disloyalty, or worse, of mocking the king, were punished brutally. Ferdinand's private insecurity had begun to transform into public tyranny, and still the whispers lingered. They whispered in the palace corridors, in the letters of diplomats, and in the fears of his subjects. Whispers that the king was not simply cursed by nature, but by his own cruelty. Whispers that Spain itself was being dragged into ruin by the twisted legacy of its monarch. This is where the true horror begins, because Ferdinand VII's story is not merely about personal shame or royal dysfunction. It is about how the private torment of one man metastasized into the suffering of an entire nation. And as Ferdinand prepared to remarry and secure his dynasty, Spain would discover that the shadows surrounding its king were deeper, darker, and far more destructive than anyone could have imagined. The tragedy of Ferdinand's first marriage was only the opening act. What followed would plunge Spain into a nightmare of betrayal, superstition, and tyranny. The year is 1814. Napoleon's armies are retreating, and Spain, ravaged by war, clamors for restoration. To the people, Ferdinand VII is not merely returning from captivity in France, he is returning as El Deseado, the desired one. Crowds gather to welcome him, showering him with adoration, believing their long-awaited savior has arrived. But behind the smiles and cheers, a far darker truth is already brewing. For the man riding into Madrid was no savior. He was a king consumed by paranoia, humiliated by the whispers that had followed him since birth, and determined to wield power not with wisdom, but with vengeance. Ferdinand's return to Spain began with betrayal. Before he even reached Madrid, he tore up the liberal constitution of 1812, one of the most progressive charters in Europe at the time. The people who had cheered for liberty suddenly found themselves under the grip of absolute monarchy once more. It was as if Spain had emerged from the fire of French occupation only to plunge into a new inferno of tyranny. Inside the palace, Ferdinand's obsessions grew darker. The humiliations of his first marriage still haunted him. Court physicians continued their secret experiments, desperate to help the king produce an heir. Some accounts describe bizarre medical procedures and unorthodox devices hidden within the palace chambers. But no matter what was attempted, Ferdinand's marriages crumbled into the same nightmare of trauma and despair. After Maria Antonia's death, he wed Maria Isabel of Portugal. She was gentle, dutiful, and only 19. To her horror, the wedding night revealed the same grim fate that had destroyed Ferdinand's first queen. The court physicians whispered that Maria Isabel's distress was even greater, for she was too timid to confront her husband directly. Within 2 years, she was dead in childbirth at only 21. The infant daughter survived a few months before succumbing as well. 2 queens gone, still no heir, still the same whispers. By now, Ferdinand's paranoia had become unbearable. He demanded silence in the palace corridors, convinced that servants were mocking him behind closed doors. He ordered guards to spy on his own ministers. Foreign diplomats reported that the king's temper would erupt over the smallest provocation, sending him into fits of rage that could last for days. And yet, he married again. His third wife was Maria Josefa Amalia of Saxony, barely 16 when she was forced into the marriage. To her, the royal chambers were not a place of splendor, but of horror. Ferdinand's abnormality and cruelty left her in a state of perpetual terror. She became increasingly reclusive, refusing to eat, refusing to speak, shrinking into a ghost of herself. After 6 years of suffering, she too died at just 25 years old. 3 queens gone, still no heir, still the secret no one dared speak aloud. By now, Ferdinand's torment was spilling across Spain like a plague. He reinstated the Inquisition, filling prisons with liberals, freethinkers, and anyone suspected of disloyalty. Torture returned. Executions became common. Entire families vanished overnight, dragged into dungeons where screams echoed through the stone walls. For Ferdinand, each act of cruelty was a kind of vengeance, a way of silencing the laughter he imagined in the shadows. And yet, despite his tyranny, the court could not escape the whispers. A king without an heir meant a dynasty in jeopardy. Foreign ambassadors wrote cautiously worded reports about the delicate situation. Ministers schemed in private, desperate to find a solution. For without a son, Spain's throne would be plunged into chaos upon Ferdinand's death. Then, in 1829, something unexpected happened. Ferdinand, now 45 and sickly, married for the fourth time. His bride was Maria Cristina of Naples, only 23 years old, young enough to be his daughter. Many assumed this marriage would end as the others had, in despair and childlessness. But this time, history shifted. Through a combination of desperate medical intervention and sheer chance, Maria Christina conceived. The palace erupted in cautious celebration. When she gave birth to a daughter, Isabella, the dynasty had a fragile lifeline. But Ferdinand's relief was short lived, for Spain was not ready to accept a female heir. Conservative factions rallied around Ferdinand's brother, Don Carlos, who insisted that the throne should pass to him instead. Thus began the Carlist Wars, bloody conflicts that would tear Spain apart for decades. And at the heart of this chaos was Ferdinand himself, too weak to control the factions, too paranoid to trust his ministers, too consumed by his own humiliations to think beyond his immediate fears. As his health declined, the palace grew darker still. Physicians described him as bloated, crippled by gout, and racked with pain. His temper grew monstrous. Ministers and servants lived in terror of his wrath. Some reported that he demanded the windows of his chambers be covered at all times, as though sunlight itself mocked him. By 1833, Ferdinand was bedridden, his body collapsing under years of disease and self-indulgence. He signed decrees with trembling hands, lashing out at anyone who dared mention the succession crisis. Maria Cristina hovered over him, torn between genuine fear for her husband and the need to secure her daughter's future. And then, on September 29th, 1833, the inevitable came. Ferdinand VII, the desired one, was dead. The official announcement was draped in solemnity. The nation was told their king had died peacefully, surrounded by prayers and family. But behind the scenes, chaos erupted. Physicians scrambled to destroy documents that hinted at the king's lifelong torment. Letters vanished, diaries were confiscated, servants were silenced. The truth of Ferdinand's life, the humiliations, the cruelty, the secrets, was buried alongside his body. Yet rumors cannot be silenced so easily. Whispers spread through Madrid that his corpse had been grotesquely bloated, that the embalmers struggled to preserve him, that even in death his body seemed a reflection of the dynasty's decay. Others swore that Maria Christina ordered certain parts of his anatomy destroyed before burial to ensure that the truth of his condition would never be revealed. Spain plunged immediately into civil war. Don Carlos and his supporters refused to recognize Isabella as queen, igniting the First Carlist War. Villages burned, brothers killed brothers, and all of it traced back to the private torment of one man. Ferdinand's abnormality had not only shattered his wives, it had fractured an entire kingdom. Today, official history often glosses over these details, reducing Ferdinand VII to a tyrant, a reactionary monarch, a failed ruler. But the whispers remain. In archives and letters in the margins of forbidden books, we catch glimpses of the grotesque truth. A king whose body was shaped by centuries of incestuous bloodlines, whose insecurity curdled into cruelty, and whose private humiliation spilled into the lives of millions. He was called El Deseado, but in the end, he became something else entirely. A king feared, hated, and mocked. A man who turned his personal torment into national tragedy, and perhaps the most perverted king in history.